This is a Hoya. It's non-toxic, blooms with beautifully fragrant flowers, and as far as I know, has no entheogenic or psychedelic properties. This particular plant has lived for years and was grown from the cutting of an older Hoya that belonged to the high priestess who initiated me. It's also surprisingly heavy. I wanted to show you something a little more baneful, but that was the only thing in the backyard I haven't killed. Lucky for you, I know someone who knows more about plants and herbs than I do, and he just happens to know about poisons too. Operator, connect me to Coby Michael. Welcome to Music, Myth, and Magic. I'm Eric Arcadian, and today I'm speaking to Coby Michael. Coby is a practitioner of the Poison Path of occult herbalism. He wrote a book about it, The Poison Path Herbal. He runs the Poisoner's Apothecary shop and is frequently teaching classes and workshops at events. Coby, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. So, hey, just jumping right into it, how would you say you got started on your path? I mean, what attracted you to baneful herbs to begin with?
Well, I've always been interested in plants and plant magic and how they can be used medicinally. It was sort of the discovery of more traditional or medieval strains of witchcraft and mention of plants like deadly nightshade and wolfsbane and mandrake and things like that kind of go way back to the ancient world, that sort of gave me this feeling of something that was a little bit older and a little bit deeper. In modern witchcraft, we really see, a lot of those plants kind of left out of all of the herbal books up until relatively recently, with just maybe a little mention of their folklore and poisonous qualities, but not anything of real substance. But when you look back and compare kind of the really big sort of mythological and folkloric associations that they've had since ancient times, and then couple that with their very powerful and active phytochemistry, we really start to see that, the medicine, the magic, the psychoactive effects of these plants were all sort of woven together in our understanding of what magic was and what witchcraft was. And they just have a really interesting sort of allure about them. First off, being that they're potentially dangerous, a little bit harder to find, harder to grow. They maybe don't grow, all over the world. They just have sort of this air of mystery around them. So that was something that definitely attracted me to them in the first place. And then finding out more about their active chemistry really sort of led down a rabbit hole of there being a lot more that these plants had to offer, beyond just being a witchy kind of a ingredient mentioned in some sort of flying ointment recipe or something that no one was ever going to use or be able to use. That there was a lot there still.
So you mentioned that they were left out of most source texts up until pretty recently. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that was?
I think that not completely left out, but they're mentioned in a way that kind of makes them almost more of like a fantasy ingredient, something that was never actually used or never, really existed, but was used by medieval authors to make a recipe sound diabolical. There'll be, I know in Cunningham's Herbals and the Master Book of Herbalism and Herbal Encyclopedia by Paul Vieral, The plants are mentioned, but there's not really an extensive body of information as far as practical use. And I think, the fact that a lot of them are poisonous kind of got them left out of a lot of sort of beginner plant magic books and magical formularies, just because they were, potentially dangerous for people to use in the wrong way. And I think that we sort of saw in the beginning of, magical pagan publishing, this attempt to really kind of make everything as palatable as possible and really sort of distance ourselves from anything that could associate us with that idea of the diabolical medieval witch, working with things like baby fat and bats' wings and anything that made what we were doing sound overly spooky. I think early on could have done more damage than good, and also the publishing companies were still kind of in their adolescence, so wanting to stay away from some of those topics that could have resulted in liability. But you do find information about them in more folk herbals and herbal pharmacopoeias talking about their use up until the 18th, 19th century as medicinal plants.
So I took your workshop at Summer Magick, which was excellent, and that's where I first learned about your book and decided to pick up a copy. And in the book, I found it really interesting. You speak of all the herbs that you work with in the book being under the domain of either Saturn, Venus, or Mercury. And then you make a comparison to archetypal mother, father, and child energies within those planets. Could you talk a little bit about that?
For sure. So as poisonous plants, they all kind of get thrown under the auspices of Saturn as the greater malefic and ruler of all things poisonous. So that runs through kind of the entire gamut of poisonous plants. But like with all plants, they exhibit a lot of different qualities too. And I started to kind of notice sort of a pattern popping up, reading about their chemical effects, as far as like being aphrodisiacs or being poisons or being visionary psychoactives, and that kind of started to follow this pattern that applied to Saturn, Venus, and Mercury. Saturn being sort of the more baneful side, the darker side, the side that's associated with death and rebirth, and some of the more taboo witchcraft practices, the more transgressive practices. And then we have Venus, which kind of rules over the realm of love magic, beneficium, which is an early word for people who dealt in poison and practiced witchcraft through the use of different love potions. And then we have Mercury, who's more the visionary, the psychopomp, the traveler between worlds. And as entheogens or psychoactives, we see a lot of these plants put into use as aids in inducing trance, to travel to different worlds astrally, to work and communicate with spirits and different things like that. And for me, those were kind of really the core elements of what this more classical witchcraft archetype was, of somebody who worked with the dead, who communicated with spirits, who had this dark side to them, and then also having that element of like sex and seduction and love magic kind of woven in there. These are a lot of the accusations or things that we see, popping up in the witch trials and different things like that throughout history.
Okay, so the word entheogens, which I was introduced to probably by reading your book or hearing you speak at the workshop, that was a new word to me. Can you explain for people who might not know what those are?
Entheogen is a term that is derived from two Greek words, and it basically means to create the divine within or to awaken the divine within, to sort of differentiate them from the word psychedelic, which has a more recreational association or a little bit more baggage. So essentially they're synonymous because psychedelics can be used entheogenically and entheogens have psychedelic properties. So the entheogen would have been used in a ritual setting, and we see this going all the way back to antiquity in ancient Greece, different ritual wines and what would have been called pharmacon or psychoactively active plant and fungi material that would have been ingested to connect to the divine, basically. So anything that has this sort of consciousness altering effect can potentially be used in ritual as an entheogen to connect to different deities, spirits, ancestors, land spirits, all sorts of things in that regard.
And you speak of the familiar spirits and the spirits of the plants. And I am wondering how someone might first try to make a connection like that.
So, familiar spirits are a big part of sort of this idea of traditional witchcraft, in that witches were connected to having these sort of spirit relationships that could take any number of forms, whether it be an animal or anthropomorphic form, or in this case, plant spirits. And it would be any kind of spirit that reaches out, that wants to have a continuous and sort of ongoing relationship. The first and easiest way to start connecting to a plant spirit is to come into contact with the living plant and sit with it in meditation, just sort of be open to kind of what comes through. But that's something, especially when it comes to plants like these, that's not always possible because they don't always grow everywhere. So it's really about being more open to what plants you're attracted to that seem to pop up in your life and in your magical practice on a regular basis. Kind of opening yourself up to the idea of poisonous plants. One will often find that there's more poisonous plants around you than you realize, or even plants that kind of exist in a gray area that kind of have that baneful nature about them. So just being open to start kind of exploring that concept, and then looking into the medicinal and chemical properties of the plants that are already around you, because there are, even a lot of house plants that have, semi-poisonous properties. Then we get into transgressive plants, or plants that are considered invasive, or plants associated with the dead. So there's all different ways to kind of tap into sort of the dark or baneful side of plant magic.
So, what are some poisonous plants that grow natively here in Florida that we might walk by every day?
Well, Brugmansia, or angel's trumpet, does really well here. Also, its close relative, the daturas, because they are more tropical plants that do like a little bit, more hot of an environment. Another one that grows really commonly would be rosary pea. It grows on a vine. It's got little tiny, tiny leaves, and the seed pods, they look like a little pea pod, but inside it are these really bright red and black seeds. Those are extremely poisonous, and they don't have any like psychoactive or entheogenic properties to them. And another one would be the castor plant. And those will just kind of grow along roadsides. Some people plant them as ornamentals. They get really, really big. They've got these little prickly seed pods that actually explode when they're ready and shoot the seeds everywhere.
Now, would there be a use for a plant that is toxic but does not have entheogenic properties?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of gets more into the realm of what I call occult toxicology, or really kind of exploring the concept of poison as this esoteric energy. Um, so it can be something that obviously causes death, so can connect to the energy of the dead. They're generally wayside plants, plants that grow in liminal places, plants that grow in boundaries. A lot of times you'll find them even growing in cemeteries. So they have this very kind of liminal quality about them. They can really be good for cord cutting, establishing boundaries, stepping into sort of one's own agency or sense of power. But when you come into contact with a plant that has the potential to be deadly, there is like a certain amount of trepidation around that, and you can almost sort of feel it coming off of the plant energetically, and that's something that can be tapped into for various different purposes, whether it is sympathetic magic for initiation, through crossing a taboo, crossing a line of fear and discomfort that then leads to sort of new understanding.
Well, that is really fascinating. I don't think I've ever thought of poisonous plants quite in that light before. I am curious, when you talk about connecting with the plant spirit, is that something that you feel is the same entity each time you work with a different plant? Like if you have a datura plant at home and then you have a datura plant in the park and you're working with each of them, are you connecting to the same overmind spirit each time?
I think so. I think when we work with plants magically, spiritually, and theogenically, we're tapping into sort of the overall memory or lineage that entire plant species has. So there's a lot of different types of datura. I think that it could be argued that there is some nuance in their personalities or their uses depending on which type, but I think that really has more to do with how the humans in that area have worked with the plant than it does any sort of individual personality that the plant spirit might have itself. So when we connect to Deadly Nightshade as a spirit, an archetype, or an idea, we're tapping into and connecting to all of these sort of already associated themes of Deadly Nightshade. But when we have an individual plant that we visit on a daily basis, or something that we grow in our living space, there's going to be sort of a more individualized relationship that develops with that particular plant spirit. And I think that has more to do with the sort of two-way transmission between the practitioner and that specific plant than it necessarily does, that plant having its own individual personality and characteristics before that introduction is made and you start that relationship.
So you mentioned that the consciousness or the plant spirit, whatever you want to call it, is kind of developed by how humans have been interacting with the plant. So do you think the deadly nature of these plants and kind of the taboo aspect or even fear surrounding the plant has kind of built it up into a particular kind of egregore that we interact with?
Yeah, definitely. I think the the fact that the plants are deadly and that we discovered that thousands of years ago and then used them for murder, warfare, manipulation, magic, medicine, all of these different things caused us to develop these associations and connect them to different ideas to kind of better understand that energy. So in a lot of ways, I think that these plants are sort of reflecting back to us, parts of our own individual shadow, collective shadow. We talk a lot about like dark herbalism and baneful herbs, and that they've got these sort of sinister qualities and personalities to them. But in the end, they're really all just plants kind of minding their own business. They're not like creeping around at night trying to figure out how they can get in and cause us harm. The worst things that they have been accused of doing have all been sort of through the medium of humans moving them around in different ways.
Yeah, that is a good point. The plants aren't responsible for the bad things that we do with them. One of my favorite parts of the book is the glyphs that you have created for some of the herbs. And I'm just wondering how you came up with the inspiration for those.
So I wanted to share a variety of different ways to work with the plant spirits and to connect to their different energies without necessarily having to go out and find the plant or to have to try and grow it yourself, because that in and of itself can be kind of a discouraging process. And these plants are very much sort of emissaries or representatives of very specific energies and ideas, and they're connected to a lot of other spirits that one could want to work with. So the plant spirit glyphs are kind of a way of representing that in a more symbolic and energetic way. So I created them by really kind of sitting and meditating on each individual plant spirit, kind of thinking about its current associations, its magical correspondences, just all sorts of different things about each individual one. And I think when you kind of go over their stories in your head, you really get a sense for sort of the persona of that particular plant. So once that connection was made, I basically did a really simple kind of sigil making technique where I took the Latin name of the plant, or you could do it with the English name, the Spanish name, essentially any name associated with the plant, and then just start removing the vowels, removing repeating letters until you're left with like a series of different lines and sticks. And then you sort of put that together in a way that is more symbolic and visually pleasing. And then using that as sort of a touchstone to connect with the specific energies that each one of those plants represents.
Well, they are beautiful glyphs. And you would say that one could use those to connect with the spirit of the plant, even without having the plant with them.
Yep, and each one of mine, I tried to make it a little bit reminiscent of the shape of the plant, and that was kind of interesting too. Just being left with all of these like vertical, horizontal, squiggly lines, and then being able to put those together in a way that actually represented, whatever letter it was taken from, but then collectively, just looking at each one, you can tell that monk's hood looks like monk's hood, foxglove looks like foxglove. So they are, kind of ideograms too that actually help you to picture the plant. But they are something that anybody can use. Anybody can use the ones in the book, but you can also sort of go through that process to create your own. Create something that's more sort of personal to you using the same sort of technique.
So we have talked about the poison, the taboo, the psychedelic, the entheogenic properties of plants. And I know when we spoke before, you had mentioned that you wanted to talk also about the plant medicine aspect. And I was wondering what you would have to say about that.
There is a lot of potential, I think, for working with poisonous plants in sort of a plant medicine setting, or more, plant-based ceremony, whether it is using a flying ointment or smoking blend, or some other preparation to safely ingest or absorb that particular plant for its spiritual and medicinal qualities. It really helps to um, open us up to really big shifts in consciousness, shifts in the way that we see the world, the way that we view our relationship with spirits and plants in general. Um, Gosh, that's a really big topic. I'm trying to find out where I'm going. They're associated with Saturn. They're associated sort of with that alchemical stage of nigredo, which is sort of the breaking down and putrefaction of the material to its sort of basest of forms. So in a lot of ways, it represents sort of the shamanic death that we see in a lot of plant medicine experiences, where sort of the ego is dissolved and then in a lot of cases kind of recombined, put back together, having new parts, new perspectives added to it that help to sort of further the person on their own healing journey. And poisonous plants are a lot like that. They do it a little bit differently than, like magic mushrooms or ayahuasca, or things that we would associate with as being more psychedelic, more enjoyable, I guess, in a lot of cases. So with poisonous plants, inviting them into your physical person, it can be uncomfortable, and it can create, sort of spooky feeling experiences. But in a lot of ways, they can initiate these sort of really transformational processes that sort of act as like a jump off point to pursue, healing through other plant allies. So essentially, think of like the Tower card in the tarot. Sort of the lightning strike that destroys the tower and casts everything to the side, and then we can build and create something new from that. So that's generally seen as being a rather uncomfortable and terrifying experience. And in a lot of ways, that is how working with poisonous plants or low dose herbs or just very chemically potent plants, to not throw around the word poisonous too much, can initiate those kinds of tower moments where everything is sort of stripped away and falls apart and then can be put back together.
Okay, well, you mentioned one key word there that I want to talk about more. I was waiting for you to bring it up, and that is the topic of flying ointment.
Cool.
So, how does one best make and use a flying ointment?
That is a really difficult question to answer, because a lot of people have really different expectations when it comes to using the flying ointment, and with what we know about it from history and what everyone says about the plants being so potent and deadly and hallucinogenic in a lot of cases. Most flying ointments that are like publicly available are more so for sympathetic uses, for magical uses. And I think when a lot of people find flying ointments or sort of look to them as a tool for plant medicine type ceremonies, that they are sort of expecting the same thing that they would achieve, taking psychedelic mushrooms or something like that, that's going to have really, really noticeable visual changes in perception. And when we look at the medieval recipes and any surviving accounts that there are regarding flying ointments, we see that people were coating their entire bodies in the ointment, and then they would go into a really, really deep sleep that lasted, sometimes 36 hours, and they would have all of these really crazy dreams. And a lot of times the dreams would have very similar themes, a lot of sexual overtones, a lot of like, what the church would have called like demonic imagery. And they do take a little bit of a darker tone than, seeing like little frogs hopping around or like purple elephants or whatever, like funny visuals that you get that make you giggle with other things. Flying ointments and the nightshade family in particular do often have a more sort of sinister and ghostly tone to them when it comes to their hallucinogenic or their effects as deliriants and what you're actually seeing and hearing and visualizing. So to get that really, really intense experience, you'd have to create an ointment that is pretty concentrated and pretty potent, which would kind of, breach the borderline of self-poisoning. And then you would have to apply it to a really large surface area of essentially covering your entire body with it. That way you're able to sort of maintain a lower dose of those active constituents in the body for a longer duration. So in lower doses, they do have sedative effects, aphrodisiac effects. They're going to influence and affect your dreams and things like that. And with all of that sort of put together, we can have some of the experiences that are more true to what we see historically in what people were experiencing using the witch's flying ointment. But for a regular person to, pick something like that up in a metaphysical store, and not be expecting, an experience like that, could potentially, not be great. So a lot of people will use them as anointing oils, to help open up the psychic senses, putting like a little bit on the forehead or their temples, or really like ritualizing the process of putting it on. But if you're really, really wanting the, sort of old school, intense nightshade experience, it's got to be pretty concentrated, and you've got to, really rub it all over, really rub it in all of the places.
Well, I think one of the things that you had said to me before, when I brought it up with you, was that a lot of people just kind of get a flying ointment, they dab a little bit on their third eye, on their wrist, and then they go and they sit in a dark room and expect something to happen. But what you told me is like there has to be more than that. There has to be a ritual aspect to it, right? So how do we kind of embark on that side?
Yeah, and that's where the term, entheogen versus psychedelic or recreational drug kind of comes in. So with the entheogen, it is a spiritual process or ritualized process where, there are a lot of existing, sort of trance inducing techniques that help to alter the state of consciousness kind of leading up to that. I also like to just kind of like build a ritual around using the flying ointment, and that, putting the flying ointment on is not like the the main point of the entire ritual, but it's part of, sort of a larger process, whether it's an initiation or to connect with a specific deity or ancestor. So, setting up an altar, playing music, drumming, different breathing techniques, applying the ointment, and then after that, kind of going through whatever sort of ritual preparations that you had laid out, whether it's casting a circle or burning different incense, lighting different candles, just whatever to really get into that ritual state of mind as the ointment's beginning to take effect.
Okay, that's interesting. I actually really appreciate the distinction that you made just a moment ago between entheogen and psychedelic. So, if I could just clarify, what it sounded like you were saying was that when you are, it might be the same substance, but when you are using the plant for its more spiritual side, you're almost tapping into the entheogenic energy. Whereas if you were just looking at it from the recreational side, then you would be tapping into the psychedelic energy. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you're going to get more psycho-spiritual effects when you really ritualize the process and work with some sort of materia entheogenically versus, just eating something and sitting there. If you eat an eighth of mushrooms and just sit there, like something's going to happen regardless of what you do. If you microdose a mushroom and really ritualize the process and like lay out tarot cards or oracle cards or have like a very set intention for why you're doing this and what you're trying to get out of it, the amount required really kind of changes. And when you tap into sort of the spiritual properties that are there, you get a lot more usable feedback and, profound kind of like what you're actually looking for in, going on a trip, and then you just wind up laying there staring at the ceiling. But when you really have a purpose to kind of guide the whole thing, you get a lot more out of it.
This is kind of, I don't want to say it's a touchy subject for me, but for lack of a better term, it's kind of a touchy subject for me because of the negative connotations with psychedelics. And also, I've been in recovery for years, and I know you have been in recovery as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about what role the craft has played in your recovery, if any, and what role that the poisonous plants have played in your recovery in that regard.
Well, just talking about like poisonous plants and psychedelics and entheogens and psychedelics, like at the end of the day, they're all part of nature. They all have spiritual components to them, and at their core are meant to be, for healing, for growth, for connecting to the divine, connecting to the spirit world. So one thing that's really sort of stuck with me on this exploration has been that, poison being a very loaded term, it often gets thrown on all of these different plants as kind of like a blanket term, and it's got its own associations. And then we've got the word psychedelic, and that's associated to certain specific substances, and in the end, they're all capable of causing these transformative experiences, experiences that help us to see the world differently, to view our place in it differently. And so, a lot of it is kind of just exploring the different man-made categories that seem to want to separate all of these different things that really belong kind of together. So I think at the end of the day, everything is rooted in spirit, and it's all about how we approach it and connect with it. As far as kind of my own recovery, it's been a really sort of long process. So you have like the initial detox that happens, and that's over pretty quickly. And then you think, oh, I'm just going to go back to the way I was before, or life as normal. And that's definitely and absolutely not the case. And it's sort of been, like this years long process of kind of unraveling all of these things that were sort of the root of why I got to that point in the first place. So my poison of choice was opiates. So I was on those for quite a long time, and then I was on methadone maintenance for quite a long time to get off of the opiates, and then it's taken a number of years to get off of the methadone and sort of transition into like a good cruising altitude. I worked with kratom for a couple of years after that. I no longer take that. But it's sort of retrospectively like looking back and just seeing like how long of a process that this has actually kind of been. And sort of through that process, coming into contact with different things, whether it was kratom or cannabis or, a plant in the nightshade family or psychedelic mushrooms. It was almost like I was meeting these allies again for the very first time, not only having like a clean brain chemistry, but a totally new perspective. And there was a little bit of fear and blockage and, not wanting to try certain things or work with certain things because of that trauma that addiction kind of created. And there was a good probably 10, 15 years that I just really didn't want to have anything to do with, psychedelics as far as like LSD or magic mushrooms or MDMA or anything like that, because of that trauma that I had with, being addicted to opiates and then being addicted to methadone and all of that, and sort of lumping all of those different things together, but then being able to sort of revisit them after having gone through like the emotional healing and the growth, and really just kind of like releasing all of these things that got trapped inside that were either not dealt with and forgotten for years, or trauma that just gets trapped in the body over years and years of accumulating all of this stuff. Being able to let go of that and kind of revisit those relationships, with a new understanding. And I think that each experience has kind of helped me to let go of a little bit more of that each time. And as far as like plant medicine ceremonies or working with psychedelics or other plant medicines, it's really something that I do on a very like occasional basis. So like when everything sort of lines up and different events happen in your life that are really sort of like big signposts for the potential for transformation. So waiting for things, in my exterior material life to kind of line up with, what I'm feeling on the inside, or what I'm feeling from a spiritual perspective. So like when I was a teenager, I would have taken magic mushrooms, anytime you asked me to, or once a week, twice a week, or whatever. And you'd think, oh, you must have been doing great. And really it was like quite the opposite. So I think that when it comes to these more profound kind of transformational experiences where we're actually gaining something from it and getting some type of growth and healing, those come a lot more few and far between, than trying to get high on something every weekend or whenever the the call happens. So just sort of like a rewiring, a re-understanding of how everything is put together inside here.
I think it's really interesting that you referred to it almost as you were meeting these spirits again for the first time. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. There's, neurochemistry that is shifting completely. There's the emotional aspect of it. And obviously, there's your spiritual side, which is, speaking from my own personal experience, also as a pretty big fan of opiates in the past. That spiritual side of you is just crushed. I was a shadow of myself, and it feels like a completely different person. So I think it's really interesting that you might have worked with, say, like psychedelic mushrooms back then and kind of had some sort of relationship with them, maybe not a spiritual relationship per se, but a relationship. And then you work with, you might work with them now, and it's like being reintroduced to them as a new person, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, even just like cannabis, like my initial reasons for trying that were just because I was a teenager and I wanted to get high and I liked the way that it felt and I wanted to keep feeling that way. So I kept doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it. But then you don't realize, like, even though you're not necessarily doing it with this intention, that it kind of puts this buffer around you that you're not really having to experience the things that are going on in your life around you, that it's kind of like insulating everything. So all of these things are happening and going on outside, and you're not really having any kind of an emotional reaction or encountering any type of resistance that might cause you to grow or to develop a new perspective. That you're just sort of in this warm, fuzzy little cocoon, and things are being thrown at you, but nothing's really sticking. It keeps the energy from flowing, I feel like, in a lot of ways, when you sort of enter into a relationship in that capacity, and that it starts to fill you up more with itself. And each time there's a little bit less of you there and more of that thing. Not saying that cannabis or any other substance, plant ally, is like this malicious thing that wants to take you over, but there are energies out there that are that, and they do want to do that, and they are able to sort of use these things to achieve that. So again, it's not so much blaming it on the substance, the plant, the fungi, fill in the blank, but sort of these other energies that are out there.
Yeah, definitely. But when used in the correct ritual construct, some of these plant allies could be gateways towards these transformational experiences, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
So I am going to ask you the signature question pretty soon here, Coby.
Okay.
Before we get into that, I want to hear where you're going to be coming up here. I know it seems like every time I see you on social media, you are off traveling somewhere or at an event, doing a class or a workshop. So how can people find you? Where will you be coming up here pretty soon?
Yeah, I try and spread it around and do the good work as best as I can. So next, or this weekend, I'll be in Massachusetts, which might not even matter by the time this airs. But I'll be at the Darkest Night Market. And then a little bit later on coming up, I will be at the Phoenix Festival, which is an outdoor nature-based spirituality festival held here in Florida, just outside of Gainesville. And then after that, also in March, I will be hosting the Botanica Obscura Conference, which is a completely online plant spirituality conference that brings together the Poison Path, psychedelic spirituality, green witchcraft, alchemy, occult herbalism, all of those things kind of woven together from a number of different perspectives. So I'll be doing that. And if you are more interested in learning how to make and to use flying ointments, I'll be doing an online flying ointment class on January 20th.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to post all those links in the video description. And then as for social media, we've got your Facebook, Instagram, any other big ones that you post on regularly?
Not really. Mainly Facebook and Instagram. I do post on Patreon, or I've got some free content on there too, as well as the subscription tiers, and that's all under Poisoner's Apothecary.
Okay, I will post all those links for you. So if anybody's watching, they want to find out more, all you got to do is click, and you'll find more about Coby. So, Coby, I'm always excited to ask this question and hear the answer. Here is the signature question. How do you use sound or music in your personal magical practice?
That's something that's really developed, I think, more recently, probably over like the past 3 years or so. I would always listen to like atmospheric music, meditation music, and instrumental music, and things like that to relax and to feel like witchy and magical and things like that. But it really wasn't until kind of embarking on this recovery process, this leg of it anyway, that I started to kind of realize like the importance of sound and music and things. And I think that came a lot more once I moved to Florida and started doing more plant medicine ceremonies and really kind of getting through like this last kind of stage of the recovery process. So music helps through vibration. So helping to kind of release a lot of the trauma that's held in the body, tension and anxiety and things like that. Just sort of learning how to like speak and project your voice and sing and make different mouth noises has been super helpful. So even just like humming, chanting, sort of like attempting to throat sing, so to speak, like you start to realize like what your rib cage and your insides and things are capable of. And that's been really helpful just through helping to kind of pinpoint like where tension is being held. Where are different areas where you need to kind of let go more, to really like let the sound move in and fill you. So that's been super helpful, and also just like learning how to breathe again and release anxiety. So like I've always been, I guess, a pretty like tightly wound person, a lot of like anxious energy. So through just like humming and vibrating, I don't know if I would even call it singing in every case. That's been super helpful just to kind of like relearn how to breathe. And I feel like that's a big thing on the recovery process, because your insides are just so locked into like what they're used to, and then you have like the trauma of detoxing and getting clean and all of like the anxiety and high heart rate and things that come with that, that you almost sort of forget how to exist in your body. So through breathing exercises, specifically involving like a vibration of the throat, the rib cage, just using your voice in different ways has been really helpful to kind of settle back into that. And then also, on the more musical end of it, we all know that like the setting, sort of the vibe that you established before any sort of ritual or plant medicine ceremony, it really helps to kind of get into the desired area of consciousness that you're wanting to sort of work in, and it really kind of directs the journey in a lot of senses. Sort of gives it a theme, gives it an intention, can help to bring up specific emotions and feelings and experiences that way that they can be released. And then it also has, the effect of kind of calming and soothing and bringing back down. So like the playlist is always super important when it comes to, different plant ceremonies. And as we see in other parts of the world too, song and instrumental music is a really big part of kind of guiding the ceremony and moving the energy. So just sort of, taking all of that in and turning it into something that is more personal, I guess, and sort of my own thing.
Well, that's great. I mean, one of the things that you had said to me last week that I found really fascinating was that sometimes, I guess, during these ceremonies, it's almost as if the particular spirit that comes, like it's reacting, responding to the type of music that's being played.
Yeah, I feel like, the type of music, the language that it's in, the rhythm of it, whether it's really fast or really slow, or we have like more like warlike fast drumming, more excitatory, is going to bring up certain energies, certain spirits, certain reactions, even on an individual basis. Whether there's multiple people in the ceremony are going to have different reactions. Some people might become ecstatic and energized by, more fast, hard moving beats, where other people, it might, I lost the word for it, but make their anxiety come out more. They might have outbursts of anger, or just really like primal, almost animalistic emotions. Whereas, slower, more soothing, more ethereal music might make people feel more calm, or maybe sad or emotional. Where it might even be irritating to other people. So it brings up all sorts of different things, I think, depending on what music is being played. And, what's especially intense is in ceremonies where you're kind of going back and forth between the two. The more excitatory, like fast, intense, what we could call maybe even like masculine sounds versus like more soothing, ethereal, feminine sounds are going to kind of ricochet you back and forth between these different emotional states. And that's where, things really get moving through you.
That is really fascinating. Do you have like particular playlists that you use for each different herb that you're working for? Does it really like get that specific sometimes?
It definitely could. I don't get that specific with it. It seems like I kind of go back and forth between more, I guess, what we could call like Amazonian music. So I have one that's like I should even pull up the playlist. Liquid Bloom is really great. Kind of chill ceremony music. There is, what's the other one? Liquid Bloom. So my sister's a plant medicine practitioner. She works in South America. She lives in Ecuador. We both learned Spanish when we were in high school. Half of our family speaks Spanish, some better than others. So that's always been kind of like an influential part of both of our lives. And she's more grounded in the South American plant medicine, where my interest has always been a little bit more in the North America, Europe. Okay, so this is Liquid Bloom as well. It's just a different playlist called Regen Mo's Remixes. And that's all more like Amazonian sounding as far as like the instrumentals. Generally if there is any kind of like vocalization, it's in Spanish. So I do a lot of those. And that's more, a little bit more chill, more like connect to Mother Earth, connect to nature, just have a good vibe. It's good for at the end too. But then I also listen to like a lot of Norwegian folk music or things with more Germanic influences. So whether it's like Donheim, Vardruna, Heilung, and a lot of those are more like war songs. They really, really get your adrenaline going. There's a lot of like really intense vocals, the Tuvan throat singing and just sort of like guttural noises, growling and like war cries. So that would be almost kind of like opposite end of the spectrum. So just kind of like depending on the type of time that you are wanting to have or feel like is needed. So yeah, it's sort of a very split.
Well, that's really cool. I do know some of those bands that you mentioned, and the others I am definitely going to check out soon and see how I might be able to add them to our ritual practices. But for now, I think we've kind of hit our time, and I just want to tell you, I really appreciate you being here and sharing some of your experience. I think you said a lot of really fascinating things that I'm going to continue to think about and learn from in the days to come. So thank you for being here with me, Coby. I appreciate you.
Yeah, anytime. I appreciate the space and the invite and had a great chat.
Good stuff.
Bye.
What a great interview. I can't wait to step up my flying ointment game. Another big M3 thank you to Coby for being on the show and sharing all that wonderful information. If you'd like to learn more about him, check out the links in the video description below. I'll be talking to other interesting people soon, so be sure to subscribe here on YouTube, follow me on Facebook at Eric Arcadian, and if you'd like to help support me making more content, you can check out my Patreon page. Remember, there's always a way to make music. Until next time.